Hey y'all, Mecca here. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. I want to hop straight into this video. So anything that you need to know about me, about the channel, or any of the cool things that I have going on, they will be in the description box, okay? Let's get it. So as you can see, the title of this video is From Hallelujah to Hoodoo. So we will be talking about my journey from hallelujah to hoodoo, from being raised in the church to how I got to be where I am as a hoodoo practitioner. So if that is something that you are interested in, please stay tuned, okay? So I guess I will start out by saying I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I migrated to my grandfather's hometown of Farmville, Virginia when I was 2 years old after my grandmother passed. And I had a very interesting upbringing. For about 8 years of the first 8 years of my life, I was the only child, and I was my grandfather's only granddaughter. And so I just would explore. We had this huge front yard. My grandfather ended up getting remarried, but when we moved to Virginia, we had this huge front yard, this huge backyard. So I was always in nature. I was always fiddling with stuff, asking questions. And I realized and recognized early on that I was very much so fascinated with life in general, with how life worked. Like I was just fascinated with life. The other thing that I noticed is I was very much so fascinated with the paranormal. I was into spirits, into ghosts, even though that used to scare it out of me. I was very much so interested in it. And those two things are going to be very important as we move forward. So keep that in mind. I grew up Church of God in Christ, Kojic, and that's just a denomination of Christianity. And if you know anything about Kojic is very strict. And so I grew up in a rather strict environment, but not strict to the point where my grandfather wouldn't allow me to ask questions because, child, I had a lot of them, okay? Reminder, I was the only child for 8 years. I had a ton of time to think. And so I remember always asking my grandfather questions about things that I heard in church, things I heard the pastor say, things that he would read to me in the Bible and things of that nature. And I love the fact that he really allowed me to expand my mind as far as religion and God and things like that go. And I remember one of the I remember one of the first questions that I ever asked him was, I want to say I was like 9 or 10, something like that. But I asked him, if God created everything, then who created God? Right? And I don't even think he ever answered me, but that question stayed with me for so many years. And even as a hoodoo practitioner now, I still ask questions like that. I still need to, like, that's the way my mind works. And so, like I said, I grew up in a very strict Kojic environment. And when I was about 9 years old, I want to say, my grandparents started to get ill. So we relocated from Virginia to where I am now in Pennsylvania. I was taken in by my aunt. And my aunt, when I first moved in with her, we would go to church every Sunday. Again, very much so religious Kojic family. Like, we weren't allowed to watch certain stuff on TV. Like, we weren't allowed to watch BET, MTV. When Harry Potter, because Harry Potter came out when I was in elementary school, we weren't allowed to read the books. We wasn't allowed to watch the movies. We weren't allowed to watch scary movies, like none of that. And I remember as I got old, well, me and my cousins got older, and we moved to New Jersey, and all of a sudden we just stopped going to church. So when we stopped going to church, I think I was at the age where, like, I didn't understand or didn't care about the fact that we weren't going to church anymore. Even though it had been something that had been a staple in my life, but now that I think back at it, I really remember that time period being a time where I explored who God was to me and what God was to me. So fast forward to my early 20s, and between 13, 14, up into my early 20s, and actually into my early 20s, there was a lot of trauma that happened. For those of you who don't know, you're new to my channel, my mother is an addict. And so there was a lot of, well, is an addict. She's still currently an addict. There was a lot of trauma surrounding that. And so that to me formed the question of, if God is just this benevolent spirit, entity, being, person, thing, you know, why is it that I consider myself a relatively good person. I'm a kind person. I don't go out of my way to inflict harm on people or just be malevolent to people. And so, like, with that being the case, I will always ask God when I would pray, like, if you're real and you really care about me, you're really for me, why are you letting all these bad things happen to me? Why are you allowing my mom to be an addict? Why? Because at this point, my grandfather had passed. My grandfather passed when I was like 17. Like, why did you take my grandfather from me? Like, why don't I have a relationship with my parents? Why do I have siblings I haven't met? It was all of these questions in my mind. And I don't want to say that I ever didn't believe in God, but I know there was a point where I was angry at God. So because I was so angry and I was looking for any type of comfort that I could find, I started to research a lot of things on my own. When I was about 19, I moved in with my aunt. I have twin aunts, and at the time they were practicing Wicca, and I would always pay attention to the things that they did, or the conversations that they would have about Wicca, but I never participated because it never clicked. Like it never clicked. And I'm very much so a vibey type person. If the vibes are not even off, but if they don't suit me, I don't participate. And so that was my first, that was my intro into spirituality outside of Christianity. Fast forward 2012, I ended up meeting somebody who would really leave a huge mark on my life. And at the time, my brother was really starting to get into the studio and recording things like that because he's an artist. And while he would be in the studio, it was like one of those little home studios, you know what I mean? So when he would be in the studio recording, I would be talking to the producer's mom. And she's very much so into the esoteric, into astrology. I want to say at the time, I don't know if she still does, but I want to say she was practicing Palo Mayombe. Like, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But I know that's what she was practicing at the time. And we would just sit and talk for hours. And she showed me this film, which you can still find on YouTube, called The Zeitgeist. And it just opened my eyes to all types of things. And so that's around the time that I started to be interested in tarot. So I started to read tarot. I started to get more into my astrology, not necessarily astrology for other people, but I started to learn my chart. I started to learn that there's more than just your sun sign. So I started to get into my rising, my moon sign, the houses, and all of that stuff. And I don't even remember exactly when, but I want to say it was when I met one of my friends. And we were having a conversation, and Hoodoo came up. And I remember talking to her and making a mental note of the things that she was saying. And the reason it was so, why it stuck out to me so much, because a lot of the things that she said, I was already doing. A lot of the things that she was telling me about Hoodoo are things that my grandfather would teach me on the low. And if you know anything about black families and Hoodoo, okay, I don't even want to say black families, black culture, right? But when we talk about our elders will never tell you that Hoodoo is what they practice. They're just out loud practicing it. A lot of things that are steeped in black culture are Hoodoo, and that's one thing that I really quickly recognized after this conversation with a friend. And so I started to think back of all of the things that my grandfather did that was Hoodoo, that he would never call Hoodoo, but were very much so Hoodoo. And back then, before I came to the understanding of what Hoodoo was, I would call it superstition. Like, I would say my grandfather is so superstitious. And when she was telling me, like, girl, this is Hoodoo, like, my mind was blown, because I was excited that not only, and if y'all hear people outside, I'm so sorry. Like, it is like 12 o'clock at night, and like, there are people outside peopling. So I apologize if y'all hear that. But I was excited that there was a name for what I had known my whole life. I was excited that it was steeped in black culture. That's around the time that I learned what African traditional religions were. And it just opened up a whole new lane for me. So I started to really study, because again, at this point in time, my grandfather had passed. And so I didn't have elders that I could sit at the feet of and ask these questions. So I had to really look for community, form community around myself, study as much as I could, talk to different people, things of that nature. And for a point in time, as I started to move more into hoodoo as a practice, there was a point where I literally denounced everything church, everything. I denounced Christianity, I denounced the church. Like, I don't remember ever feeling as though I denounced God. I still have questions though. But I never denied that a higher power exists. So fast forward, and all of this happened in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Um, Fast forward to now, it's like I've been able to really merge the two, because my thing, especially being someone who takes ancestral veneration so seriously, I personally, Mecca, I can't say that I honor my grandparents and I honor my ancestors and not recognize where I came from and what they did as far as their spiritual practices. And so a lot of times y'all will hear me consider myself a churchy conjurer, right? Y'all hear me refer to myself as a churchy hoodoo, because there are very many aspects of the church that I still carry with me, although I don't consider myself a Christian, although I very rarely go to church. And don't get me wrong, if you consider yourself a Christian, baby, and you practice hoodoo, that is A-okay. No qualms about that. But for me, yes, for me in my house, as for me in my practice, um, Christianity is just not something that I subscribe to. But like I said, there were certain things about my growing up in church and being so close to my grandfather and watching him be a man of God that I just carried with me. And so what it really allowed me to do, and when I say it, I mean hoodoo. What hoodoo really allowed me to do was to define my relationship with God for myself. And when I did that, that opened up so many doors for me. Like, it made my practice feel less constrictive. It made me feel like we were put on this earth. We were meant to put on this earth to walk different walks of life. And there's no wrong way, or there's no one way to have a relationship with God. So hoodoo has very much so strengthened my relationship with God. Of course, it's strengthened my relationship with my ancestors. And I have just been really taking stock over like the last 2 or 3 years of how hoodoo has very much so changed my life. And so as I grow in my practice, because to know anything about being a spiritualist is to know that you never stop learning. You're always learning. If y'all hear people say, "Oh, well, I know this and I know that, and I'm grown, or I growed, or I'm not growing," like any of that, you're always growing. You're always new levels, new doubles. Okay. But it's allowed me to really track my growth in a different way. Like, it's allowed me to really peer into how hoodoo has played a major part in my life. And like I said, I'm always going to consider myself a churchy hoodoo, because baby, I still listen to gospel. I very much so pray. I'm very much so in my Bible frequently. And that's just me as a hoodoo. There are some hoodoos that you'll find that they don't use the Bible in their practice. Me using my Bible in my practice, me listening to gospel music, that is still my way of connecting with my ancestors and feeling like they're a part of my practice. So that's how Mecca got from hallelujah to hoodoo. I hope this video helps somebody out, because I know a lot of you that follow me are pretty new to hoodoo. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I am so open to answering them. And until next time, be great, get bread, stay all the way live, and with everything being intentional, have the day you conjure. Peace.